She didn't care about me and kept dashing toward me as if she couldn't feel pain. I squeezed the peachwood branch in my hand and lashed it again and again. Each time I lashed her, a wisp of gray smoke rose from her body. When the ghost finally stopped, the color of her body had dimmed. She retreated far away from me. Her blood-red eyes were filled with fear and malevolence. Cinnabar and the water of retribution were very harmful to ghosts. Since Chun Tingting could endure so many lashes before retreating, it was enough to prove that her ghost was very powerful. If a ghost wanted to increase its power, there were only two ways. One was to swallow other ghosts, and the other was to kill people. After they died, it would swallow their souls. From Chun Tingting's situation, I guessed she had killed many people and swallowed many souls. It was also the reason why she was so violent and crazy. After swallowing a lot of souls, a ghost would become crazy and instinctively want to kill people. Chun Tingting finally calmed down after being beaten into submission like a human. She looked at me cautiously and said in a hoarse and unpleasant voice, "Why did you call me over?" Before I could answer, the little girl's voice came from behind me. "Mom." I sighed and summoned Chun Tingting's soul. At first, I just wanted to confirm whether the little girl was her daughter and fulfill her wish of finding her mother. However, I didn't expect that I would summon Chun Tingting, who had become a ghost. The little girl walked out from behind me. She looked at Chun Tingting with puzzled eyes. At this moment, Chun Tingting was stirred up. She wasn't happy, but angry. Her shrill voice screamed, "It's you, you little bastard. You've grown so big already. I had to kill myself because of you, you little bastard." While cursing, she struggled to get closer to me. However, I guessed she saw the peachwood branch in my hand. She moved her body a little and then stopped. The little girl wanted to go to Chun Tingting, but she was so scared that she hid behind me. She peeked her head out and looked at Chun Tingting in fright. After listening to Chun Tingting, my first question was answered. This little girl should be the baby I had seen that year. However, Chun Tingting's behavior puzzled me. From what she had said, she had blamed her daughter for her death. She hated her daughter a lot. However, she had become a ghost and swallowed many souls. If she hated her daughter that much, why didn't she come and swallow this little girl? I pointed at Chun Tingting with the peach branch and asked her the question in my mind. Chun Tingting sneered and gazed at the little girl hiding behind me. Her voice was filled with hatred. "Do you think I don't want to? I've tried so many times over the years, but this little bastard isn't like me. I can't swallow her. She will grow up. She's neither a human nor a ghost." Neither a human nor a ghost. I had a vague idea in my head. However, before I could figure it out, Chun Tingting scolded again. "You have 3 souls, but you're still an idiot. You've been guarding this toilet for so many years, but you've never swallowed a soul." "All 3 souls are there?" A bolt of lightning flashed in my head. The death scripture had mentioned that there was a kind of fetus that died the moment its 3 souls were formed. After its death, there was a chance that its heaven soul and earth soul wouldn't scatter. It would become a ghost with 3 souls. Only this kind of ghost with 3 souls could be like the little girl. After its death, its soul could continue to grow. When I read about this kind of ghost in the book, I didn't think that I would encounter one. The probability of this kind of ghost forming was so low that the death scripture called it a heavenly fetus. This kind of ghost with 3 souls was very precious to a geomancer. Most of the feng shui masters have little ghosts that can help them do a lot of things. And this kind of ghost is the most precious kind of ghost. Ordinary ghost, no matter what, is still a ghost. But this kind of ghost, the 3 souls are no different from people. Raised well, for feng shui masters, it is endless magical use. After calming myself down, I didn't think about it anymore. I turned to Chun Ting Ting and asked, "You've harmed a lot of people these years. I won't ask about the things I don't know, but I want to know what you did with Su Ziyu." "Su Ziyu?" Chun Ting Ting asked back. It was obvious that she didn't know who Su Ziyu was. I pointed at the little girl. "The girl she brought to the toilet a few days ago." Chun Ting Ting's ghost laughed. "You're talking about the girl she treated as her mother. It's quite a coincidence. I've been keeping an eye on that little B asterisk starred all these years, trying to find a chance to kill her and make her soul scatter. Who knew that before I could find a chance? She brought me a pregnant girl. She might know that I love pregnant girls the most these years. I'll pester them and make them kill their babies, just like I did back then. Then I'll swallow the soul of the newborn baby. TSK, TSK. After the baby dies, the adults won't be able to get over it. I'll tell them to kill themselves. That way, they'll be like me back then, and I'll have another serving of food." While talking, she smacked her lips as if she was reminiscing about something delicious. She seemed to be in a frenzy. My heart tightened. I stared at her and asked, "Answer my question. Why was there your blood on Su Ziyu's bed?" Chun Ting Ting's ghost giggled. "Because I gave birth to that little B asterisk starred in the wash basin. That's why I put the wash basin on her bed and waited for her to get the baby out." When Chun Ting Ting died, she was trapped in her own obsession. Over time, she formed this kind of crazy thinking. She wanted to kill all pregnant women, and she wanted to be like herself. First, she let others abort the child, and then she regretted it and committed suicide. Chun Ting Ting must have been involved in Su Ziyu's case from the beginning. However, when I arrived, she had already disappeared. The thick yin energy in the dormitory wasn't caused by the little girl who had no intentions of harming anyone. It was Chun Ting Ting. However, there was one thing I didn't understand. When I saw Su Ziyu that day, she wasn't covered in yin energy. I used to think that only the little girl had interacted with her, and that the little girl didn't have any intentions of harming anyone. However, Chun Ting Ting was also involved. How could Su Ziyu not have yin energy? When I asked Chun Ting Ting, she giggled and said, "I have to kill the fetus in her stomach before I let her die." After listening to her, I exhaled in relief. Then I suddenly thought of something. My face changed, and I glared at Chun Ting Ting. "You did something to the baby in her belly." Chun Ting Ting licked her lips and sneered. "Her uterus is full of yin energy. The moment the baby is born is the moment the baby dies." It had been a week since Su Ziyu had encountered that strange incident. It was fine if the yin energy stayed in her body for a short period of time, but it had been a long time. It was hard to get rid of it. Chun Ting Ting was still laughing crazily. I didn't want to talk to her anymore. I took out a box made of locust wood and put Chun Ting Ting's soul inside. Then I used cinnabar and water to suppress it before closing the lid. I had seen old he used paper dolls to preserve souls, but I didn't have that kind of power yet. I could only use the locust wood box to store the soul. Locust wood was used to hide ghosts, and it was the simplest tool to seal souls. After dealing with Chun Ting Ting, I called the little girl and asked her, "Do you want to go with me?" Although the little girl didn't know much about the world, Chun Ting Ting's words made her understand a lot. She cocked her head and thought for a long time. Eventually, she nodded and agreed. She had two big, bright eyes, so I named her Tong Tong. Tong Tong's remains could be found in the sewer of the toilet. Her body was already there. However, I still had the jade bracelet that Red Shadow had used to possess her, so Tong Tong could temporarily stay there. The next day, Su Ziyu came to me and thanked me. "After my talk yesterday, I've made up my mind. I want to talk to my family and keep the baby." Chapter 32. Su Ziyu had a faint smile on her face. She looked completely different from before. She looked less gloomy, but more hopeful and brave. Although her voice sounded weak, I could imagine how much courage it had taken for her to make this decision. However, the yin energy in her womb wasn't something that could be dispelled with courage. The timing that Chun Tingting's spirit had chosen was too coincidental. It happened to be the time when the fetus' three souls were formed, and the yin energy had invaded the fetus soul. The yin energy would grow and nourish the fetus soul until it reached its peak at the moment of birth. The fetus would be born on a yin day and a yin hour, and it would die right after birth. At the same time, it would give birth to a yin ghost. Unless they met a real geomancy master, there was no way to save the fetus, let alone the fact that I hadn't comprehended qi yet. Even if I did, the chance of saving the fetus wouldn't be more than 10%. From a rational point of view, I had to persuade Su Ziyu to abort the child. It was the best choice. However, yesterday I had tried my best to persuade her to keep the child, but today I suddenly changed my mind and asked her to abort the child. What was going on? I didn't dare to persuade her directly, so I tried my best to tell her that the blood on her bed was Chun Tingting's ghost blood. It had a lot of yin energy, and it could affect the fetus in her womb. Moreover, she still had to finish her studies, so she had to think twice before making a decision. Su Ziyu looked at me in surprise. Didn't you ask me to keep the child yesterday? Why did you change your mind today? I shook my head. I didn't know that the yin energy had affected the child. If he were healthy, of course, I would fight for him. However, he was infected with yin energy in the womb. If you insisted on giving birth to him, it wouldn't be fair to you. Then I looked at her abdomen. I could faintly feel the yin energy lingering there. At this moment, Su Ziyu suddenly laughed. Little Zhou, I understand what you mean, but ever since you brought me to see that little girl yesterday, I've already made up my mind. No matter what, I can't let my child become like that. No matter if he's healthy or disabled in the future, he's still my child. I can't deprive him of his life because of me. You don't know, when that little girl hugged me and called me mommy last night, my heart broke. It was then that I realized how stupid I was to want to kill my own child. The more difficult the choice was, the more resolute the decision would be. Su Ziyu's eyes were resolute. She smiled and said, Moreover, medical science is very advanced now. I've checked a few times during the pregnancy. If there's any problem, we can do an ultrasound to find it. We don't need to worry about it now. Su Ziyu's way of thinking was normal for ordinary people. However, a child with yin energy in his soul wouldn't have any problems before he was born. At most, he would be weaker than a normal fetus. Only during the birth would there be problems. I knew I couldn't persuade Su Ziyu anymore. Unwilling to give up, I asked, what if, and I'm just saying, what if the child dies when he's born? Su Ziyu looked at me suspiciously. However, she quickly regained her firm expression. Xiao Zhou, I know you're not an ordinary person, but you don't need to persuade me anymore. The child might have his own fate, but I'm a mother. I have to do what a mother should do. Even if it's like what you said, that the child won't live after he's born, I will still persist. Even if he can only see the world once after he's born, he has seen the world. I can't leave him with no hope at all. After listening to Su Ziyu, I quieted down. I suddenly felt that Su Ziyu's way of thinking was correct. No matter how young a life was, it had the right to live. Perhaps some tragedies were destined to happen, but we couldn't let them happen ahead of time just because we knew about them. Just like what Su Ziyu had said, even if he could only see the world once, he had seen it. I had to leave him with hope. At first, I wanted to persuade Su Ziyu, but I didn't expect that she would be the one to persuade me. However, I also made up my mind. I had to study the death scripture even harder. If I could understand the existence of Chi before she gave birth, perhaps I could increase her hope a little. Since Su Ziyu's pregnancy was about to show, she would attract a lot of criticism in the school. After talking to her family, she decided to leave school at the end of the semester. Before she left, I asked for her address. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to contact her after she went home. Fortunately, her house was in the city, which was close to the school. If something happened, I could get there immediately. It was already the end of my first year, and it was summer break. I didn't go home and stayed in the school alone. I focused on studying the contents of the death scripture, hoping that I could understand the existence of Chi as soon as possible. Staying in the school alone was a little boring. However, whenever there was no one around, I would call Tong Tong out to keep me company. That way, I wouldn't feel lonely. The power of extreme yang during the day was very harmful to ghosts. Normally, ghosts couldn't appear during the day. However, Tong Tong's 3 souls were still present, so she wasn't affected. She could appear at night or day. I also asked Tong Tong why she used to hide in the toilet and never come out. Tong Tong said that she had appeared in the toilet before, but the people who saw her were afraid. She didn't want to scare them, so she kept hiding there. It wasn't until she thought of Su Ziyu as her mother that she went to find Su Ziyu. The more I interacted with Tong Tong, the more I could feel the kindness in her. This kind of kindness wasn't like humans. After receiving education and understanding the truth, they would restrain themselves and form kindness. She was born kind, and she didn't want to bring harm to others. Perhaps this was the so-called pure heart of a child. Geomancy masters also had a way to raise ghosts. The simplest way was like what Chen Tingting's ghost had said, which was to swallow other souls to strengthen itself. This method was suitable for both the ghosts raised by geomancy masters and the wandering ghosts in the natural world. It was the law of the jungle, where the strong preyed on the weak. Naturally, powerful ghosts could be born. However, this method had a lot of uncertainty, and the strengthening speed was very slow. Heaven and earth had its own rules, and ghosts were creatures that defied the laws of heaven and earth. Weak ghosts would vanish in a short time, while the strong ones could only resist for a few more days. Ghosts that relied on this method to strengthen themselves couldn't escape the fate of vanishing in the end. Ancient geomancy masters had gone through a lot of trials and tribulations to find a way to raise ghosts. Different geomancy schools used different methods. The death scripture recorded a method to raise ghosts. It was called the art of connecting with gods. According to the book, ghosts exist for a reason. If you practice this method, you can connect with gods. Tong was lucky that she had 3 souls. Otherwise, with her kind nature, she wouldn't have swallowed other souls. Otherwise, she would vanish in a short time. However, even if she had 3 souls, she couldn't stay in this world forever. After she stayed with me, I copied the art of connecting with gods from the death scripture. When I had free time, I read it to her. Not long after that, I found that Tong's body had become more solid. She didn't have the illusory feeling of a soul anymore. She looked just like the red shadow. However, Tong didn't seem to be interested in cultivating the art of connecting with gods. She didn't like to stay outside all day. She would return to the jade bracelet. If she had nothing to do, she said that it was very comfortable and fun to stay inside. I felt strange. It's just a jade bracelet where a soul lives. How could it be fun to stay inside? I asked her several times, but Tong always smiled and told me that she couldn't tell me. This made me even more puzzled. Tong was an extremely naive child. In principle, she wouldn't hide anything from me. Why? Out of curiosity, I often guessed the reason and asked her, "Tong, is there something in there that can harm me? Is that why you don't want to tell me?" Tong's eyes curved. She smiled and shook her head at me. Is it because there's a lot of delicious food in there, and you're afraid that I'll go in and take all the food? Is that why you don't want to tell me? Chapter 33. I'd learned about Su Ziyu's case through my classmates in the e-learning society, and the e-learning society was the one who'd brought the situation around. Not long after the new semester started, Dai Nanzhou came to me and excitedly told me that the e-learning society had invited a feng shui master to give a speech at our school. He wanted me to go with him. This kind of thing was very common. The various societies in our school would try their best to invite famous scholars to give speeches. The E-Study Society had held this kind of activity before. However, I was disappointed when I went to see it. It wasn't because the people they invited were all swindlers. It was because the so-called feng shui masters they invited were all theoretical people. In other words, they were at the same level as me. They knew a lot about feng shui, but they hadn't reached the next level yet. They didn't understand the existence of qi, and they didn't have an ability like old he's. That was why I wasn't interested after hearing Dai Nanzhou's words. However, he immediately told me that the person they invited wasn't simple. He was an honorary professor from a famous university in our country, and he was also the vice president of our city's Feng Shui Association. The former title sounded powerful, but I wasn't interested in it. I was more interested in the latter title. I vaguely remembered that when Old He came to our school, the principal had called him President He, although I didn't know if Old He was a member of this Feng Shui Association or not. Dai Nanzhou's words reminded me of him. I followed Dai Nanzhou to the school's auditorium and met Professor Deng Meng. As soon as I saw him, my eyes brightened. It wasn't because he looked like an immortal. In fact, he was skinny with a long face and triangular eyes. He looked really strange, but when I saw him, I got the same feeling I had when I first saw Old He. It was a strange feeling, and I couldn't describe it. However, it made me excited. After I sat down, I heard Professor Deng talking about the feng shui of a house in the yang and a house in the afterlife. He also talked about the usage of Luo Jing. When I heard the words Luo Jing, I felt that it was more reliable. Luo Jing was actually a compass. Traditional feng shui masters usually talked about Luo Jing. However, for some reason, people in modern times only talked about compasses and rarely talked about Luo Jing. As for feng shui and geomancy, Professor Deng's lecture was also very interesting. However, there were too few people who could understand it. No one was interested in it. After the lecture was over, the students from the Yishui Society stood up to ask questions about ghosts and spells with great interest. I also pricked up my ears. When we talked about ghost spells, it was hard to avoid the topic of Professor Deng's experience in dealing with ghosts. Was he just an ordinary geomancer, or a skilled geomancer like Old He? It was recorded in the death scripture that after comprehending qi, a feng shui master would be able to grasp many extraordinary abilities. At this time, a feng shui master could be called a geomaster. While answering the students' questions, Professor Deng quickly talked about talismans. He also mentioned that he made talismans with qi at this moment. I was sure that Professor Deng was a feng shui master who had mastered qi. I couldn't help but feel excited. Professor Deng was the first real geomancer I had met since I started studying the death scripture. Instinctively, I stood up and asked, I heard that a feng shui master must be able to control the qi in the air to draw it into a talisman and create a real talisman. I wonder if Professor Deng can tell me how to control the qi in the air? Since I was just asking, it wasn't too abrupt. As soon as I asked this question, all the students' eyes sparkled. They all gazed at Professor Deng. Not many people in the Yishui Society were interested in boring feng shui knowledge. Most of them were influenced by movies and TV shows. Their minds were filled with thoughts of catching ghosts and controlling corpses. Naturally, they were interested in making talismans. Professor Deng glanced at me. It seemed he didn't want to talk about this. However, he simply answered while the crowd was still clamoring, "Everything in this world is inseparable from yin and yang. One creates and one transforms, and the other intersects with the xian and the huang. When one receives and the other receives, they connect from the top to the bottom. That is qi. You said that you can control qi, which is yin and yang." In the death scripture, the description of qi was gentle and serene. There is essence, because it enters the primal chaos. It is called Tai Chi, because it is the beginning of one's creation. It is called Xiantian, because yin and yang haven't separated. It is called qi. It wasn't much different from Professor Deng's description. However, I didn't quite understand what he meant when he said, "Controlling qi means controlling yin and yang." I asked, what if someone can feel the yin and yang energies, but can't feel the qi? What should we do? Of course, I was referring to me. I could feel yin and yang. For example, when I went to the girls' dormitory's toilet, I could feel that the place with the densest yin energy was in the inner cubicle. However, I was still confused about qi. After asking this question, Professor Deng furrowed his brows and looked at me with a bit of bewilderment. After a while, he opened his mouth and said, "Student, your question itself is wrong. Heaven and earth use primal chaos as the qi, and my body uses the qi of the underworld as the qi. Qi is an intangible thing, so how can I feel it?" I was dumbfounded. I couldn't feel qi at all? Then why did the death scripture say that one had to comprehend qi to become a geomaster and draw qi into talismans to create talismans? While I was still puzzled, Professor Deng said, "Moreover, qi isn't something to be felt. It's something to be used. As long as a geomaster can feel yin and yang, they can use it. This is the qi drawing talisman. Yin energy is qi, and yang energy is also qi. If you draw yin and yang energy for your own use, you can control qi." After hearing what he said, I was suddenly enlightened. It turned out that I had been walking the wrong path for a long time. Qi was something intangible, and I couldn't feel it. As long as I could control yin and yang energy for my own use, I could use all the skills of a geomaster. In other words, I was already a geomaster. I just needed to slowly familiarize myself with the incantations and talismans. As expected, his words woke him up. Although the death scripture recorded all sorts of things, there were some obscure areas that would be too difficult to comprehend on his own without someone to lead the way. The problem that had been bothering me for a long time was finally solved. I was grateful to Professor Deng, but I didn't want to tell him about it. I was still a layman in the circle of geomasters, so I had to be careful. However, after he finished his speech, I went to see him. It wasn't to thank him, but because of Suziyu. I knew that even if I became a geomaster today, it was still impossible to solve Suziyu's problem. It would be better to ask Professor Deng for help. At first, I was worried that Professor Deng wouldn't agree to help me. However, after I told him about the previous incident, he agreed immediately. Moreover, he asked me for the details of the previous incident. Of course, I wouldn't tell him everything. After all, the death scripture had mentioned that Tong Tong's soul was extremely precious. It could attract the greed of other geomasters. Moreover, I didn't want to expose my secret. I told Professor Deng, "Last time, we only saw 2 ghosts. From their conversation, we learned that Suziyu's child had been infected with yin energy. We didn't know anything else." Professor Deng's enthusiasm was completely different from his appearance. Not only did he agree to help Suziyu, but He also asked us to take him to the female dormitory. He said that he was worried that the ghosts hadn't left yet, and he didn't want to hurt the students. We took him there. However, Chun Ting Ting's soul was in my locust wood box, and Tong Tong's soul was in the jade bracelet on my neck. Professor Deng had spent a lot of effort, but he didn't find anything. When we returned, Professor Deng was disappointed. I didn't pay much attention to him, but later on, Dai Nanzhou told me that he had gone to the female dormitory several times. It seemed he was very concerned about this case. This made me admire this skinny Professor Deng even more. Only a geomaster like him, who took care of ordinary people as his duty, deserved the title of master. After several fruitless visits, Professor Deng gave up. He contacted me and asked me to visit Su Ziyu together. According to the address, Professor Deng and I went to Su Ziyu's house. Her child was 5 months old. When we arrived, Su Ziyu told me that she had gone to the hospital for an ultrasound scan. The doctor said that although the child was weak, there was nothing wrong with him. Everything was normal. This situation wasn't out of my expectation. However, I wasn't worried anymore. With Professor Deng here, the chance of saving this child would be much higher. Indeed, after checking for a while, Professor Deng said that he was confident that he could save this child. Then he left an ornament that I didn't know what material it was. He asked Su Ziyu to keep it with her and come back when the child was born. I didn't understand Professor Deng's methods, but I didn't ask. Different geomasters had different inheritances, and it was one of their secrets. I shouldn't pry. After that, Professor Deng left the university. However, he left me his business card and asked me to pay attention to the female dormitory. If something strange happened, I must inform him. Moreover, when Su Ziyu gave birth, I must call him. Because of these two things, he deliberately told me that he would stay in the city for a while and wouldn't go out. No matter how I looked at it, Professor Deng was a man of noble character. I also respected him a lot. However, the strange thing was that the night after Professor Deng left, Tong Tong, who didn't like to come out of the jade bracelet, suddenly came out. She said to me in a serious tone, "Brother, that old man wasn't a good person. Don't contact him anymore, okay?" Tong Tong, how did you know that Professor Deng wasn't a good person? Tong Tong's big eyes looked scared. I don't know, but I'm sure he's a bad person. Brother, you have to believe me. All right. I rubbed Tong Tong's hair and said lovingly, "Tong Tong, don't worry. I'll try to contact him as little as possible." Although I said that, I felt that Tong Tong was a ghost, and Professor Deng was a feng shui master. That was why she said that, because she was afraid of Professor Deng. Around 1 month after Professor Deng left, something strange happened at the university. However, it didn't happen in the female dormitory. It happened in the teacher's apartment. According to Dai Nanzhou, a 1-year-old child fell from the roof of a professor's house in the teacher's apartment and died on the spot. It wasn't strange for a child to fall from the roof, but after the professor's house had a child, all the windows were equipped with special guardrails to protect the child. Normally, the child wouldn't be able to climb out of the window. However, it happened. The professor's house was equipped with surveillance cameras. When I checked the surveillance footage, I found a strange scene. At that time, the baby's crib was placed next to the windowsill, and the sleeping baby crawled out of the crib. Chapter 34. After telling me the story, Dai Nanzhou wore a worried face. The E-Study Society is in an uproar. Everyone is saying that this is too strange. I'm sure there's a ghost behind this. President Huang wants to call me there to discuss this matter. Although I didn't show much knowledge about geomancy, when the people of the E-Study Society were there, Dai Nanzhou was a blabbermouth. I was afraid that he had told others about my summoning of souls. Now, when the people of the East Study Society saw me, they all looked at me with admiration. This time, they came to call me as soon as something happened. After listening to the story, I was also frightened. It wasn't because of the strange behavior of the child before his death. It was because this case wasn't as simple as Dai Nanjo had said. Things like ghosts were usually formed after death with intense resentment and resentment. In addition, there were also special feng shui and other coincidental factors. No matter how they were formed, they were naturally evil. Especially when they went against the heavenly path, they lived in a precarious situation. They had to swallow other ghosts to survive. Under such circumstances, ghosts would harm people. After killing them, they would swallow the victim's soul. That was why there were so many cases of ghosts harming people. However, even if those wandering ghosts wanted to harm people, they didn't have any powerful means. At most, they could bewitch people and confuse their minds. They could magnify the negative emotions in people's hearts and make them commit suicide. Back then, Chun Tingting had swallowed many ghosts, but her greatest ability was to use her Yin energy to harm the child in Su Ziyu's belly. She couldn't even use her Yin energy to harm Su Ziyu. According to Dai Nanjo, this child was possessed by a ghost. However, it wasn't as simple as being bewitched by a ghost to commit suicide. From his behavior, such as climbing the guardrail of the baby bed and tearing open the iron window, these actions weren't something a wandering ghost could do. Unless, of course, he was a little ghost raised by a geomancy master. I went with Dai Nanjo to the East Study Society. I learned that this case had happened 3 days ago. Since we had reported it to the police, they had sealed the news. Now, it was only spreading in our school. It wasn't right or wrong for the police to block the news, but at least they could prevent it from causing too much panic. Furthermore, from President Huang's information, it seemed like our school wasn't the only one that had been murdered recently. Children's souls are the purest, and the little ghosts refined by them are more powerful. This is also the reason why feng shui masters call the ghosts raised by them as little ghosts. Except for some special cases, feng shui masters use the souls of children or even babies to refine ghosts. Like any other industry, there are good and bad people in the field of feng shui master. Some famous and upright feng shui master are bound by classic doctrines. They usually choose the children who died for some reason and ask the wishes of the ghosts. On the other hand, some unorthodox feng shui masters didn't have so many scruples. Often, in order to refine powerful ghosts, they would deliberately find some children with matching feng shui. After killing them, they would capture their souls. If it was just one case, it wouldn't be a big deal. The feng shui master who had done evil in the dark was just an ordinary feng shui master who had refined a little ghost. However, if it was a serial case, the feng shui master wouldn't be simple. He wouldn't only refine little ghosts, but also small ghost formations. Just like the other formations that feng shui masters could set up, the little ghosts that they raised could also set up formations. Just the formation methods of little ghosts recorded in the death scripture included the 6-sting protective formation, 5 ghosts moving technique, 3 souls killing formation, and dozens of other types. Even ordinary geomasters couldn't use the little ghosts to set up formations. Only feng shui masters with a higher cultivation base could use them. After understanding feng shui masters better, they would find that feng shui masters and ordinary people were like elephants and ants. Once a truly capable feng shui master wanted to harm people, ordinary people couldn't defend against it. If this case was really like what I had guessed, and it was done by a feng shui master with a high cultivation base, I was afraid this case would be left unsolved. Ordinary people couldn't deal with a feng shui master. I told the students of the East Study Society about my conjecture. Everyone quieted down. As people who had grown up in a society governed by law, they were indignant at the malicious act of depriving people of their lives. However, after learning about the horrible murderous deeds of feng shui masters, they were scared. Moreover, they felt powerless. Under such circumstances, what could they do even if they found the murderer? From a legal point of view, those children had committed suicide. There was no evidence that the murderer had killed them. Moreover, even if there was evidence, how could ordinary people arrest those feng shui masters? I was afraid that even the police couldn't do it. This kind of power that transcended the mortal world couldn't be controlled. After a long moment of silence, President Huang opened his mouth. Although we don't know the details, I'm sure the country has a way to control these people. Otherwise, if we let these people do whatever they want, the world would have been plunged into chaos. His words eased the silent atmosphere a little. Everyone excitedly discussed whether the country had a secret department that specialized in managing feng shui masters. After the discussion, the originally excited people calmed down. Whether there was a national department or not, this matter was too far away from us. This time, it was a case of life and death. It wasn't a small case like the one in the girls' dormitory. It wasn't something that the feng shui fans of the East Study Club could participate in. In the end, Dai Nanzhou was the smartest one. After a long moment of silence, he slapped his thigh and said excitedly, "I remember now, Professor Deng Meng. I saw the title Special Consultant of the Municipal Public Security Bureau on his business card. Do you think Professor Deng is from a government department?" When everyone heard this, they all cheered up. The more they talked about it, the more they felt that Professor Deng was from the mysterious department. Shortly after, they unanimously decided to contact Professor Deng. If the police department suppressed this case, people from Professor Deng's department wouldn't know about it. It would be the same as letting the murderous feng shui masters get away with murder. A 20-year-old university student might not have any abilities, but he had a strong sense of justice. After making the decision, we immediately took action. President Huang called Professor Deng. After the call went through, we explained the situation to Professor Deng. Professor Deng was as enthusiastic as ever. "I'll contact the Municipal Public Security Bureau and ask about the situation. Then I'll come to our school to investigate." One day later, Professor Deng came to our school with 2 uniformed policemen. When we arrived at the school, Professor Deng came to find me. He asked me to go with him to the professor's house to check the crime scene. I was flattered. However, since I was curious about this case, I didn't think too much about it and followed Professor Deng. When we arrived at the teacher's dormitory, the building was cordoned off. We didn't hurry to go upstairs, so we went to check the crime scene first. The child's body had been moved away. There was only an iron rod as thick as 2 fingers left on the ground. There were dark bloodstains on the rod, which sent chills down people's spines. Professor Deng asked the 2 policemen about the crime scene. Then, the policemen showed us the photos they had taken at the scene. Professor Deng looked at the photos for a while, then gave them to me. "What do you think?" I took the photos and looked at them. What my eyes saw was always crueler than what my ears heard. The 1-year-old child looked like he was just standing there playing. However, there was a thick iron rod between his legs. The strange smile on his face formed a strong contrast with the bleeding 7 orifices on his face. It made people shiver in fear. What was even stranger was that the child was only wearing a red tutu. Both his hands and feet were wearing silver bracelets and anklets. This kind of dressing wasn't strange in ancient times, but nowadays, how could a child dress up like a lucky doll? I didn't dare to take another look. I returned the photos to the policeman and said, "Previously, I suspected that a geomancer had killed the child and captured his soul, turning him into a ghost. Now, it seems to be the case. Professor Deng nodded, then asked me, "In this school, you're the only geomancer. Have you seen any signs of other geomancers in the past few days?" During our time together, I didn't hide my knowledge of geomancers. It wasn't wrong for Professor Deng to say that I was a geomancer. I shook my head. I was afraid that only the geomancers of the East Study Society knew about geomancers. I hadn't seen anyone else. Professor Deng asked me again, "That day, you asked me about my understanding of qi. I'm guessing that you've also touched this layer, right?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. When I asked that question that day, I thought that my question was vague. But in fact, even a geomancer didn't know about drawing qi into a talisman. Since I was a student, it was obvious. Now that Professor Deng asked, it wasn't appropriate for me to hide it anymore. Professor Deng turned his head to look at me after I admitted it. There was a strange expression in his eyes. After looking at me for a while, his eyes calmed down, and he faintly said, "Since you've comprehended qi, you should have been trying to draw qi into a talisman to make talismans. Moreover, you've also been trying some other methods of a feng shui master." His question was a bit strange. While we were talking about the case, he suddenly changed the topic to me. Not only was it strange, but the two policemen standing not far from us also looked at Professor Deng in confusion. I nodded. What Professor Deng said was correct. I had been trying to make talismans for a while now. However, comprehending energy and actually using energy were two completely different concepts. Even after such a long time, I hadn't succeeded in making a talisman even once. At this time, Professor Deng suddenly sighed and asked in a faint voice, "Then, have you started raising ghosts?" Chapter 35. I lifted my head to look at Professor Deng. I was so shocked that I couldn't talk. After a long time, I calmed down and tried to speak. "I've thought about raising a ghost, but I haven't found the right opportunity." Professor Deng turned around to look at me. He gave me a faint nod, then went upstairs. Although he didn't say anything, the two policemen's faces changed. From time to time, they turned to look at me. Their eyes were full of vigilance. I didn't feel good. I had always respected Professor Deng, but now he had started to doubt me. It was the same feeling I had when I was a child when my parents thought that I had done something wrong. We went upstairs to Professor Jiao Dongliang's house. Although it had been 3 days, it was still a sad thing to lose a son in a middle-aged man's life. Mr. and Mrs. Jiao still looked tired. After asking why we were here, Mrs. Jiao burst into tears. She didn't want to cooperate with us. Professor Jiao helped her back to her bedroom to rest. In the end, only Professor Jiao Dongliang came out to answer our questions. Since the police had done their investigation, Professor Deng was the one who came to ask questions. As soon as he opened his mouth, he asked about the child's birth date and horoscope. Professor Jiao was surprised. He asked the two policemen for Professor Deng's identity before answering the questions. After asking about the child's birth date and horoscope, Professor Deng squinted and moved his left thumb on his other forefingers to calculate. I knew it was a way to use the Luo Sutra. It used the palm to replace the Luo Sutra. It was very convenient to calculate the time of yin and yang. It was called the flipping trigram palm. I also calculated in my head. The child's birth date was on the yin day and the yin hour. It was the perfect embryo to refine a ghost. Then, Professor Deng asked if anything strange had happened to the child before the accident. Professor Jiao tried to recall for quite a long time. However, he only told me the things a child would do. There was no clue. When Professor Deng was about to leave, I couldn't help but interrupt him. "Did you guys dress the child up with the red doo-doo and the silver hoops on his hands and feet?" Professor Jiao was surprised. My wife dressed him up. I'm busy with work, so my wife usually stays at home to take care of the child. Although I didn't know what was wrong with the red doo-doo and the silver necklace, I had a feeling that something was wrong. To verify it, I asked Professor Jiao to go back to his room and ask him. The answer surprised us. Professor Jiao was not the one who dressed the child up, nor was it his wife. Both of them thought that the clothes and the silver bracelet were bought by the other party. Originally, the two of them still had some doubts. However, after the incident, the two of them were too engrossed in grief and forgot about this matter. Then we checked the surveillance footage before the accident. 2 hours before the accident, we found that the child had climbed out of the stroller and ran to the blind spot of the surveillance camera. When he came back, his one-piece baby outfit had turned into a red doo-doo, and there were silver rings on his hands and feet. This was the only valuable clue we had found today. I was shaken. I wanted to find the exact location of the kid according to the surveillance footage. At this moment, Professor Deng called me and urged me to go back. It's useless to investigate the red doo-doo. At most, it can prove that it's a necessary procedure of the soul-capturing ritual. It can't help us find the geomancy master who raised the ghost. I felt strange. I didn't know why, but I felt that Professor Deng's attitude was perfunctory. He had only asked for my birth date and the 8 characters of the horoscope, which had already been asked by the police. It was impossible for us to find any clues. Now, as soon as I found some clues, he urged me to go back. However, I resisted the urge to ask more questions. I stood up and followed Professor Deng. No matter what, Professor Deng had invited me here. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to see the crime scene. If I followed my own ideas, I would offend Professor Deng. However, after we left, Professor Deng explained to me, I'm here to check if the police have forgotten anything. When I was in Professor Jiao Dongliang's house, I didn't see any place with thick yin energy. We don't need to waste time here. We should check the child's body as soon as possible. He was right. The crime scene was only important when the police investigated the case. To a geomancy master, the body could reveal more secrets. I didn't think too much and followed Professor Deng to the forensic department of the Municipal Public Security Bureau. Professor Deng was the special consultant here, so he was familiar with the place. After the 2 policemen escorted us here, they left separately. After the policemen left, Professor Deng explained to me the question he had asked me about raising a ghost. He told me, after a case like this, as long as it's confirmed that a soul hunter was killed to create an imp, the police will immediately mobilize the people around the crime scene to find out who has the ability to create imps. Then, they will interrogate them one by one. Rather than letting the police find me in the future, it would be better to tell them now and let them investigate. It would save us a lot of trouble in the future. After listening to his explanation, I felt much better. I didn't feel wronged anymore. Then, Professor Deng filled in a form to apply for an autopsy. Since Jiao Dongliang and his wife had signed the agreement to perform the autopsy, Professor Deng submitted the form and took me to the freezer. We found the child's body. The real person was even scarier than the photos. Below the small body, there was a huge bloody hole. Blood flowed from the 7 orifices on his face. After being frozen, they looked like black and red centipedes crawling on his face. It was a horrifying sight. However, the scariest part was his eyes. They were still open, and as he lay there, no matter where I was, I felt as if his eyes were staring at me. Professor Deng had seen this kind of thing too many times. He didn't look surprised at all. After changing into a white surgical gown, he went to find a big bag of tools. I felt strange as I thought he was going to dissect the body. However, he opened the bag and took out an air tank with a nozzle. He also prepared a small glass bottle. I felt strange. What do you want to do? Professor Deng's answer surprised me. I want to refine the child's corpse oil. Corpse oil was a kind of oily liquid that was secreted when a corpse was roasted. From the perspective of geomancy, corpse oil was very useful. However, it was usually used in evil geomancy rituals, such as the soul-capturing ritual to raise a ghost. Corpse oil was the strongest material to restrain a person's soul. When a geomancy master wanted to restrain a person's soul, the easiest way was to refine the corpse oil and then restrain the soul. This method was foolproof. Moreover, after raising a ghost, the geomancy master would let the ghost live in the corpse oil. It was the best material for the ghost. Why did Professor Deng refine the corpse oil? I asked him in bewilderment. Professor Deng answered indifferently. The child's soul has been captured and refined into a ghost. Summoning the soul won't work. However, if we refine the corpse oil, there's a chance that we can summon the ghost soul back. Although the geomancy master who raised the ghost used this cruel method to refine the ghost, the thing he used to house the ghost wasn't as good as the corpse oil in the child's body. As long as we could refine the corpse oil and use the soul summoning spell, we could forcefully take the ghost back from the geomancy master. After listening to his explanation, I understood everything. However, I didn't feel right. I had an instinctive aversion to this cruel method. Professor Deng turned on the gas tank. There was a special ignition device on the nozzle, which spurted a light blue flame. He aimed the nozzle at the boy's chin, which had a lot of fat. He didn't let the hot flame touch his skin. Instead, he placed the nozzle about 2 or 3 centimeters away from his skin. Shortly after, the boy's frozen body, which had turned purplish-gray, slowly turned rosy. A few minutes later, the roasted parts of his body became smooth and shiny. Right at this moment, I smelled the aroma of roasted meat. Instantly, my stomach convulsed, and I couldn't help but retch. Fortunately, I had been busy for a long time and hadn't had time to eat. Otherwise, I would have vomited already. Professor Deng turned around and shot me a faint glance. Chapter 36. When I saw Tong Tong's 8 characters on the yellow paper, I panicked. I had a bad premonition. Professor Deng placed an incense burner on the table and lit 3 joss sticks. He was about to perform the soul summoning ceremony. I couldn't help but call him, Professor Deng. Professor Deng turned around and narrowed his eyes. He looked at me with a sinister expression before asking, "What is it?" I didn't care about anything else. I braced myself and pointed at the yellow paper on the bottle. "Did you write the wrong date of birth?" Professor Deng slowly turned his head and looked at it. He said calmly, "Oh, I did write the wrong one. This is the 8 characters of the baby girl in the toilet that you mentioned last time." Although he said that, Professor Deng didn't want to take off the yellow paper. He slowly prepared the last thing for the soul summoning ceremony. I didn't know what Professor Deng meant, but I still had a bad premonition. I asked him, "Professor Deng, don't we need to change the 8 characters?" Professor Deng didn't pay attention to me. After he had prepared everything needed for the soul summoning ritual, he calmly turned to me and said, "I forgot to tell you, a few days ago I went to your school and found a bit of the baby girl's remains in the women's washroom. The bone powder was one of the things I added to the bottle just now. According to you, the baby girl disappeared. I'm afraid she found a place to hide. To prevent the baby girl from harming people again, I plan to use her bone powder to summon the soul back. I plan to summon the child's soul first, then the baby girl's. However, since I got the wrong 8 characters, I'll summon the baby girl's soul first." His words made my heart jump. The last time I told him about it, I was very careful. I wanted to hide the fact that Tong Tong was a natural fetus. However, Dai Nanzhou Su Ziyu, and the others had all seen Tong Tong's appearance at that time. As long as Professor Deng analyzed the situation before and after, it would be very easy for him to discover this matter. After investigating, he didn't find anything, so he left. I thought he had forgotten about it. I didn't expect that he would go and find Tong Tong's remains. I was even more panicked. Tong Tong had been dead for many years, and he didn't even have his bones left. The bones that Professor Deng had found were probably the last thing he had left. Just like the corpse oil, the bone powder in Professor Deng's hand was definitely the best material for Tong Tong to possess. Back then, it was also because of the jade bracelet left behind by the red shadow. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to take Tong Tong away without finding his remains. But now that Professor Deng had bone powder in his hands, if he really performed a soul-recalling ritual on Tong Tong, she would definitely be summoned from the jade bracelet. There was also a problem with the degree of fusion for the little ghost's host. The most suitable would naturally be the corpse oil, bone powder, hair, and other things from the corpse itself. At the very least, it would be the clothes that the little ghost had worn when it was alive. Although the jade bracelet left by the red shadow could help the little ghost possess it, compared to Tong Tong's remains, I didn't have any confidence in the jade bracelet. If Tong Tong was found, how could Professor Deng let her go? Tong Tong was always by my side, and I treated her like my little sister. I never forced her to do anything. However, if Professor Deng summoned her, he would turn her into a little ghost that could swallow other ghosts. With Tong Tong's personality, it would be worse than letting her soul vanish. While I was at a loss, Professor Deng suddenly said, "Last time, you summoned the ghost of the baby girl's mother. You should know how to summon the soul of this baby girl. You should summon the soul of this baby girl." Then he leaned to one side and gave me the table. His eyes were still squinting as he looked at me. I didn't know what he meant, but I felt that he was hiding something. Instinctively, I found an excuse to reject him. The soul-summoning technique requires different materials. I can't use the materials I have right now. According to the schools of feng shui masters, there were many types of soul-summoning techniques, and they all required different materials. Professor Deng gave up. He returned to the incense burner table and read the soul-summoning spell. His soul-summoning spell was different from the one recorded in the death scripture. I didn't understand the specific content. It didn't seem to be the language we used, and it sounded mysterious and hard to understand. Along with his voice, a small whirlwind slowly rose from the incense burner with the 3 joss sticks. At the same time, I felt the jade bracelet on my chest getting colder. I was so anxious that I kept praying to Tong Tong not to come out. After a long time, feng shui masters could form a tacit understanding with ghosts, and they could even communicate with each other. Although Tong Tong and I didn't have this kind of tacit understanding, I could only pray in my heart. Perhaps it heard my prayer, but the cold feeling on the jade bracelet disappeared, and it became calm again. Although I didn't know what had happened, I felt that Tong Tong wouldn't come out. At this moment, Professor Deng's soul-summoning spell ended, and the whirlwind in the incense burner disappeared. Professor Deng frowned and looked at the incense burner. Then he turned to me and stared at me. His stare made me feel uncomfortable. A long moment later, he said, "I didn't expect that I wouldn't be able to summon the soul of the baby girl's mother. And now I can't even summon the baby girl. The mother and daughter's souls have become spirits." He even went to Chen Tingting's corpse to summon her soul. However, I had subdued Chen Tingting's soul in the locust wood box. It would be strange if he could summon it. However, his words gave me goosebumps. It seemed he had a deeper meaning behind them. Professor Deng didn't give me time to think. He reached out his hand and tore off the 8 character on the small bottle. He put away the bottle containing the corpse oil and Tong Tong's bone powder. Then he took off his surgical gown. It seemed he wanted to leave this place. I was bewildered. Didn't he say that he wanted to summon the child's soul? Why did he suddenly put it away? After asking, Professor Deng absent-mindedly said, "My soul-summoning technique failed once. I'm afraid I won't be able to summon the child's soul again. I'll wait until tomorrow." Then he got up and left. I followed him, but Professor Deng was nowhere to be seen. I didn't know where he had gone. His previous actions had made me very anxious. I didn't have the mood to look for him anymore. I hurried to return to the campus. When I arrived at the campus, I found a quiet place and held the jade bracelet. I called Tong Tong's name. After a few calls, a shadow flashed in front of me. Tong Tong appeared in front of me. I heaved a sigh of relief. Although Professor Deng had said that he had failed to summon the child's soul, I couldn't see through him today. I had to see Tong Tong to calm down. I asked Tong Tong, "Did you feel anything strange?" Tong Tong immediately nodded and said with some lingering fear, "I was in a daze just now. I heard someone calling my name. So I slowly followed the voice and almost came out of the jade bracelet. Later, Big Sister, Big Brother called me, so I woke up and quickly hid in it. I was bewildered. Did I just call her name? Tong Tong could hear what I said in my heart. I hurried to ask Tong Tong, "Does she know what I want to say to her right now?" Then, to verify it, I murmured in my heart, "Tong Tong, kiss me, kiss me." Tong Tong tilted her head and thought for a while. Then she blinked her big eyes and said, "I don't think so." I was a little discouraged. It seemed we still had a long way to go before we could connect our minds. However, since Tong Tong could hear my voice, I guess she wasn't far from being able to connect our minds. Just as I was about to tell Tong Tong to go back, Tong Tong put on a stern face and said in a critical tone, "Gidge, you promised me that day that you wouldn't contact that old man anymore. Why are you with him today? If I hadn't woken up, that old man would have called me away." I hurried to apologize to Tong Tong. At first, I thought that Tong Tong didn't like Professor Deng because of his identity as a feng shui master. But now that I thought about it, Professor Deng was coveting Tong. He wanted to find Tong Tong. Tong was right to dislike him. In the future, I would have to keep a distance from this sinister old man. After assuring me several times, Tong Tong snorted and accepted my apology. She didn't talk to me anymore and returned to the jade bracelet. The next few days were peaceful. Although I had decided to keep a distance from Professor Deng, I was still concerned about the progress of the previous case. Moreover, Suziu's problem hadn't been solved yet. No matter what, I had to maintain a good relationship with Professor Deng. Moreover, as a geomancer, it was normal for Professor Deng to covet Tong Tong, an extremely rare fetus. Although it made me uncomfortable, Professor Deng's behavior wasn't too bad. I didn't blame him. However, in the next 2 weeks, there was no news from Professor Deng. I called him, but he didn't pick up. This made me worried. Suziu had been pregnant for more than 9 months. I was afraid she could give birth at any time. If I couldn't contact Professor Deng, by then, all my previous efforts would be in vain. While I was worried, the East Study Society was still studying the previous case. One day, Dainanzhou called me over. When we were discussing the case, I mentioned the red doo-doo and the silver necklace that the child was wearing. Dainanzhou, who was quick-witted, asked, if Professor Jiao and his wife didn't buy the red doo-doo and the silver necklace, could it be that the geomancer sent the little ghost to his house? His question enlightened me. I had been thinking about the connection between the two items and the soul-capturing ritual, but I had never thought about how they had ended up in Professor Jiao's house. Dai Nanzhou's suggestion of sending the little ghost to his house wasn't true. Tong Tong was a rare fetus, and he had to practice the godhood technique to be able to put on clothes. The little ghost's strength was really weak. The red doodoo was easy to explain, but the little ghost couldn't have sent the silver necklace to Professor Jiao's house. The silver necklace wasn't heavy, but it was very dense. The little ghost wouldn't be able to carry it. Thus, someone must have sent the two items to Professor Jiao's house. After I found this clue, I told the students in the E-Study Society. Everyone was excited, and they immediately split up to investigate. Since many of the students in the E-Study Society were in the student council, it was easy to find the surveillance videos in the school. In just one afternoon, Dai Nanzhou and the others had gathered all the surveillance footage from the teacher's apartment on the day of the incident. We checked the videos together. Soon after, I saw a familiar figure in the video, Professor Deng. Chapter 37. How could it be Professor Deng? Before checking the CCTV footage, I had never thought that I would see Professor Deng there. Although I was wary of him, it was because of Tong's case. I could understand why a feng shui master coveted a rare spirit like Tong. However, I had never thought that he would be involved in this case. At this moment, I remembered that when I found the red doodoo and the silver necklace in Professor Jiao's house, Professor Deng had calmly stopped me from asking any more questions. Also, during the soul summoning ceremony in the forensics office, Professor Deng had said that he wanted to summon the spirit of that child. However, it turned out to be the spirit that summoned Tong. At that time, I was skeptical, but I had never thought that Professor Deng was the feng shui master who had killed the child and raised the spirit. What was even more unbelievable was that he had taken the corpse oil from the child. On the surface, it looked like he wanted to summon the spirit. However, if Professor Deng was the murderer, he would have taken the spirit vessel to raise the spirit. No wonder I had seen him refine the corpse oil so skillfully. Moreover, he had prepared a set of corpse oil extraction equipment in the forensics office. Perhaps his title as a special consultant in the forensics office of the Municipal Public Security Bureau was to make it easier for him to refine the spirit. On the one hand, he had used his metaphysical knowledge to kill the children, and on the other hand, he held a position in the Public Security Bureau. When the corpse was sent to the forensics office, it fell into his hands. Professor Deng's scheme was really cunning. This time, there were 4 cases of children's deaths in our city. Who knew how many had happened in the past? Moreover, if Professor Jiao's house didn't have surveillance equipment, no one would have noticed the strange behavior of the child before his death. No one would have guessed that it was the work of a feng shui master. After thinking about it, I felt a chill run down my spine. In the past few years, I had seen many terrifying ghosts and spirits. I had even seen skeletons and female corpses. However, those ghosts and monsters had only appeared to harm people. No one was like Professor Deng. While killing people, he lived a normal life. He was a university professor, the vice president of the Feng Shui Association, and he even held a position in the Public Security Bureau. Compared to ghosts and spirits, humans were the scariest. The students of the E-Study Society were still discussing why Professor Deng had appeared in the surveillance footage. Only I was certain that he was the murderer. My heart was pounding, and I was scared and angry at the same time. So what if I can confirm that he's the murderer? Call the police? Moreover, Professor Deng had been working in the forensic department for many years. I was afraid that no one would believe my words. The recharge ratio is 1. 1 yuan is equivalent to 100 rock coins. WeChat, you can top up your WeChat account. Once you grab a red packet, you can look at it for a long time. The ratio is 1. 100 Alipay people with Alipay accounts can choose. The ratio is 1:100. Like Alipay, PayPal has a 1:100 ratio. Mobile phone prepaid card. This was the most convenient and fastest way to top up. Yen supported 3 types of top-up cards: Mobile Shenzhou card, Unicom card, and Telecom top-up card. They could be found in newsstands, convenience stores, and supermarkets. The top-up ratio was 1:85, which was less than online banking because the mobile network would deduct some surgery fees from it. Game Point card. It was easy to buy, just like a mobile phone top-up card. However, Yen only supported the following types of Game Point cards. The rest were not supported. They were Jun Wangyi card, Shengda Game card, Journey Game card, Qcoin card, Longyu card, Yibao, NetEase card, Perfect World card, Sohuchangyu card, Zhongyu card, Tianxia card, and Tianhong card. The top-up ratio was between 1:70 to 75. Please only purchase the above. The other Game Point cards were not supported. PayPal. This was specially prepared for overseas friends. I will not introduce it further. Finally, there was the problem with the Apple app. The top-up ratio was 1:50. It was not worth it. Therefore, students who use the app should not choose to top up. Go to the website and search for the Yen website. Log into your account and use any of the methods listed above to top up. After that, you can log into your account on the app. The top-up ratio would be filled up, and you could spend money normally. After top-up, reading would be the same as before. Every chapter you read would be deducted. It was not troublesome at all. It was best to activate automatic subscription. That way, every time a chapter was updated, the website would automatically deduct the fees. It was more convenient. She didn't tell me about it because of that sister's warning. Now, I was even more curious about this jade bracelet. Unfortunately, I was a human, and I couldn't enter the jade bracelet like a ghost. Unless I could follow the death scripture and become a geomancy master, I would be able to cultivate a yin or yang spirit, which would allow me to escape from my body. After resting for a while, I saw that Su Ziyu had calmed down a little. I went to comfort her. Su Ziyu didn't react as violently as before, but her face was still numb. She didn't listen to me. I had to stop trying to comfort her. The baby in your arms has passed away. The baby died as soon as he was born, and he has a lot of resentment. You have to give him to me and recite the rebirth mantra a few times to get rid of the resentment and bury him peacefully. Su Ziyu's face finally regained some energy when she talked about the baby. She slowly sat up and lowered her head to look at the baby in her arms. Her numb face glowed with motherly light, and the corners of her mouth curled into a smile. I told you, even if he died as soon as he was born, he still got to see this world. So don't worry, he won't have any resentment. I know that. Looking at Su Ziyu's face, I felt even more upset. However, it didn't matter if he had resentment or not. As long as this baby was with her, Su Ziyu would always be in pain. I insisted on burying the baby as soon as possible. Su Ziyu seemed to be angry. She glared at me and said, "He's my baby. I won't bury him. I want to keep him with me." Keep him with me? But he's already dead. I looked at Su Ziyu's resolute face and felt that something was wrong. Many people who had lost their children didn't want them to leave, so they thought of all kinds of methods to keep their child's body with them. Some even used the power of a geomancy master to raise a ghost. This kind of situation was common in Southeast Asia. Did Su Ziyu have that kind of idea? However, I thought about it and felt that Su Ziyu wouldn't think of such a method. It was just something she said because she was too sad. When she calmed down, she would give her child the best place to go. Since Su Ziyu didn't agree to bury him, I couldn't force her. I had to give up and leave with Tong Tong. Before leaving, I purposely searched around Suziu's house. Soon, I found her parents in the other bedroom. The old couple was pacing back and forth in the small bedroom. They looked confused. It was definitely Professor Deng's ghost. It had bewitched them and made them walk in circles in the bedroom, unable to get out. I walked over and shouted in front of them. The old couple immediately woke up from their bewilderment. As soon as they saw me, they asked me, "Why are you here?" They didn't wait for my answer and told me that Suziu was giving birth. They wanted me to go with them. The old couple didn't know what had happened. I blamed myself even more. At that moment, I learned that in the antique trade, the yellow talisman paper was called lousy. These yellow paper talismans were not cheap. A stack of 5 talismans would cost 500 yuan. Since I was short of money, I could only buy 2 stacks of yellow paper. Together with the weasel hair brush and the cinnabar, I spent almost 2,000 renminbi. If it weren't for the 10,000 renminbi that Director Li had given me when I first came to the university, I wouldn't have enough money to buy these things. After buying the items I needed, I returned to the dormitory and started to make talismans. Talismans had different levels of difficulty. The simplest ones were the Peaceful Earth Talisman and the Purifying Sky Talisman, which were used in the geomancy of Yang and Yin residences. It was my first time making talismans, so I started with the Peaceful Earth Talisman. The Peaceful Earth Talisman didn't have any other effects. It was only used to inform the land after the Yang and Yin residences were settled. After laying the yellow paper talismans and grinding the cinnabar, I went to wash my hands. Then I silently prayed to the ancestor of Feng Shui, the goddess of the 9th heaven. These were the necessary rituals to make talismans. After everything was prepared, I didn't hurry to make talismans. I first closed my eyes and gathered my energy, reading the mysterious accumulating mantra. The mysterious accumulating mantra was a talisman that could dispel evil spirits. It allowed the Feng Shui master to guide energy into the talisman better. It was a supplementary technique before making talismans. After doing all this, I felt a wisp of energy appear in front of me. Then I picked up the weasel hair brush and started to write on the yellow talisman paper. Each talisman was a complicated and abstruse pattern. It was far from being as simple as the yellow talismans in the hands of the Taoists of the Jianghu. Just remembering these patterns required a lot of time. It took me many years to gradually remember a few of the commonly used yellow talisman patterns. Although I had memorized the patterns in my head, when I started to draw them, I found that it was very difficult. Making talismans wasn't just about drawing the pattern. I had to control the energy to follow the tip of the brush and make it flow into each stroke of the pattern. That way, the completed pattern would be a real talisman. I hadn't even drawn half of the first yellow talisman paper when I made a mistake. It wasn't that my memory of the pattern was wrong. It was just that during the drawing process, the tip of the brush inexplicably changed directions. I couldn't control it at all. It was a sign that the energy didn't follow the brush. Although I could draw the energy like a wisp of silk, it wasn't easy to control the energy to follow the brush. My first attempt was a failure. I put down the brush, but I wasn't discouraged. The little deceiving talisman's effect was to seal the connection between Chief Lu's family and the ancestral bloodline. It would also separate the ancestral energy from the ancestral curse. This way, after destroying the metal water formation around the ancestral grave, Chief Lu's family wouldn't be affected by the geomancy of the ancestral grave. After the grave was moved, I would take back the little deceiving talisman to ensure that the grave would be moved smoothly. After opening the talisman, I stuck the little deceiving talisman on the main tombstone of the ancestral grave. Then, I turned around to check Chief Lou's fortune-telling. In just a blink of an eye, both sides of Chief Lou's head turned pale. It was because he didn't have the ancestral energy to protect him. Although the geomancy of Chief Lou's ancestral grave was bad, the ancestral energy had the effect of protecting his descendants. Moreover, the ancestral grave's geomancy was suppressed by the metal water formation, which helped Chief Lou a lot. After everything was done, Chief Lou came to me and asked, "Mr. Zhou, can we start moving now?" I nodded. Yes, we can. However, we need to prepare the new grave first. The remains of our ancestors shouldn't stay outside for a long time. We have to move them as fast as possible. Last time, Chief Lou had told me that he had already found the location of the new grave. That was why I didn't take the initiative to help him find it. Hearing that, Mr. Lou heaved a sigh of relief. He waved his hand and said, "I've already prepared the new grave a few years ago. On the way here, just now, I've already sent people over to fix it up. When we're done here, everything will be ready." "That's good." I nodded and walked around the grave. According to the 8 diagrams, I found the place where the 3 statues were buried. I stuck a tree branch in each spot to mark it. After I was done, Chief Lou turned around and waved his hand. More than 10 workers came with tools in their hands. They started to move toward the place I had marked. During this process, Chief Lou's hands were crossed. His eyes were glued to the workers' movements. His body shivered. I was a little nervous. In theory, the little deceiving talisman could cut off the bloodline connection to move the grave. However, before I succeeded, I couldn't make any promises. Fortunately, the workers quickly dug a deep pit in the ground, revealing 3 stone statues of different colors buried underneath. Nothing strange happened in between, and everything went smoothly. This time, they had to dig out all the statues. Since I had told the workers beforehand, they didn't need to be careful. After the top of the statue was revealed, they directly tied a rope to a cart and pulled it out. As the statues were pulled out, the metal water formation was broken. Now, we could only rely on the little deceiving talisman. I became even more tense. However, Chief Lou seemed to relax a little. He didn't hesitate and directly asked all the workers to dig right above the grave. They quickly dug up the grave. As it turned out, my worries were unnecessary. Everything was calm. Under the joint efforts of dozens of workers, it took them only 1 hour to dig up the main grave, revealing a dark hole underneath. Chairman Lou's ancestral grave was quite old. It was more than 200 years old. Logically speaking, a grave of this age would have collapsed unless there was a large underground palace. However, this grave was still in good condition, which was rare. Since we had excavated the grave, and it was in good condition, the next step was simple. We just needed to find the coffins, collect the remains, and take them out. As soon as I heaved a sigh of relief, I heard some loud noises coming from the dark hole. Chapter 42. The workers were frightened and ran back like a swarm of bees. Some of them didn't even ask for their wages and ran down the mountain. In the end, a few calmed foremen and Mr. Lou's driver managed to convince the workers to stay after a long time. Even though they managed to stay, the workers were still horrified. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and kept mentioning the word zombie and so on. After the chaotic scene calmed down, Mr. Lou turned around and looked at me with an extremely sinister expression. He asked me word by word, "Mr. Xiaozhou, you promised me that there would be no mistakes this time." Previously, Director Lou had always been very kind. When he spoke, he would smile most of the time. He looked like an amiable elder. But this time, after his face darkened, I finally saw the aura of a business tycoon. However, I didn't panic at all. I only shook my head at Mr. Lou and said, "Mr. Lou, don't panic. It's not a zombie. Not a zombie? Hearing me say that, Mr. Lu's expression calmed down, but he still asked, Then, Mr. Xiaozhou, why don't you tell me what the sound was? It wouldn't be the sound of a stone falling on the ground, right? The pung pung sound was very clear. It was clearly the sound of someone hitting the ground. It couldn't be the sound of a stone falling on the ground. Mr. Lu was clearly warning me not to use a lame excuse to fool him. However, he was thinking too much. I shook my head and said, Of course it wasn't the sound of a stone falling on the ground. Your ancestor's tomb was preserved very well. After we dug it up, the inside didn't collapse, so there wouldn't be a stone falling on the ground. As for the sound, it did come from the coffin. Mr. Lu's pupils constricted. He stared at me and didn't say anything. It was obvious that he was waiting for me to give him an explanation. I looked at the dark entrance of the tomb and asked Mr. Lu, did Mr. Lu think that the sound just now was like a sound? Mr. Lu followed my gaze and looked at the tomb, then said hesitantly, Like the sound of a drum? That's right. I nodded. It was the sound of a drum. In ancient times, there were drums outside the government offices, also known as the cries for grievances drum. If the common people had grievances, they would beat the drum to express their grievances. Therefore, the sound of beating the drum has a meaning, which is to express grievances. Chief Lu looked at me in confusion. Before he could say anything, his driver couldn't help but ask, What does it have to do with our current situation? Of course, there's a connection. I sighed and said, There's a saying about the sound just now. It's like a corpse hitting a coffin, and the soul crying out for injustice. In fact, it's just the skeleton in the coffin being wronged, and that's why it's making noises. Corpses can knock on coffins? Is it really that amazing? Mr. Lu's driver still had a look of disbelief. I shook my head. This kind of thing is very common. In many construction sites, people dig up ancient coffins. When they hear noises coming from inside, they think it's a zombie. But when they open the coffin, they find that it's just a pile of bones. This kind of thing has been seen many times in the news, so it's not rare. Then, Mr. Little Zhou, do you mean that we can directly invite the remains out without any other concerns? Chief Lu's voice softened a lot. It was obvious that he agreed with what I said. I nodded. Everything has a spirit. The corpse was originally buried, but it was dug up for no reason. The corpse that has turned into bones has no ability to take revenge. It can only make a few helpless cries in the unseen world. Of course, it's fine to carry the coffin, but this is your ancestor. The cries clearly means that they don't want to leave this place. Chief Lu, don't you want to reconsider? Although they had turned into bones. Everything in the unseen world had a spirit. Although I used a talisman to isolate the connection between Chief Lu and the ancestor's bloodline, they were still related by blood, so the connection couldn't be completely severed. Naturally, they could still feel it. However, what I didn't understand was that Chief Lu moving the grave was for the sake of the ancestors. It was a filial act. If the ancestors had a spirit, they should be happy. Why would they cry out in sorrow? I couldn't understand the reason behind it, but the cries of withered bones were a very sad thing. I couldn't help but advise Chief Lu to reconsider. Chief Lu's expression returned to normal. There wasn't any hesitation on his face. He quickly rejected me and said with a smile, Being filial doesn't mean that I just let them do whatever they want. Perhaps the ancestors were willing to do so, but as a descendant, I can't just watch them suffer and do nothing. Mr. Little Zhou, you don't need to persuade me anymore. Since there's nothing else, I'll arrange for people to move the grave. Then Chief Lu called the driver over and said a few words. Then the driver walked to the group of workers and shouted. It was just the sound of sand and stones rolling down from the grave. Don't worry, there weren't any zombies. Also, to help everyone calm down, today's wages will be doubled. If you're willing to carry the coffin, Your wages will be doubled." These words finally calmed the workers down. The group of people returned to the side of the grave, put down the extension ladder, and prepared to enter the grave. Although Chief Lou's ancestors came from a rich family, there were rules governing their graves. If they weren't high-ranking officials, their graves couldn't exceed the rules. There was only a simple grave. The workers were a little scared, but Chief Lou's driver volunteered. He went into the grave alone. After walking around for a while, he popped his head up and told the workers that it was safe down there. Then he called the others to go with him. Only then did everyone cast aside their earlier fear. In order to get their wages quadrupled, they all volunteered to go to the tomb. The group of people busied themselves for a long time before they finally brought out 2 coffins. When I saw the 2 coffins, I was a little surprised. It wasn't because the coffins hadn't rotted after so many years, but because the 2 coffins were red. Moreover, it wasn't the usual crimson red, but a very bright red. Even though they had been buried for 200 years, the color of the coffins wasn't dark at all. From the perspective of funerals, red coffins didn't necessarily represent good or bad luck. It could be related to the burial customs and the owner's birth date. I didn't really care about the color. Chief Lou's ancestral grave was a big family grave. At least 6 or 7 generations of his ancestors were buried here. I thought that Chief Lou would let me stay here until all the graves were moved out. Unexpectedly, after the 2 coffins were brought out, Chief Lou gave me a brown paper bag. He smiled and said, "This time, I'm sorry to trouble you, Mr. Zhou. This is a small gift from me. I hope you won't mind." I was bewildered. I had just opened one grave, and Chief Lou wanted me to leave? I couldn't believe it, but since he had said so, I didn't force him to stay. I greeted him, then bid farewell. When I left, Boss Lou even specially arranged for his driver to drive me all the way back home. On the way back, I recalled what had happened today. I felt that Chief Lou's attitude was strange, and I couldn't understand him. I couldn't find anything after thinking about it for a while, so I didn't think much about it. Instead, I focused on studying talismans. Because I was short on money, I couldn't practice a lot. But this time, Chief Lou gave me 100,000 renminbi, which was more than enough to buy yellow talisman papers and other items. After school started, I went back to school and bought a lot of yellow talisman papers and other items. Every day, I tried to make talismans, which helped me advance quickly. During this time, I purposely went to Suziu's house. Her family seemed to have walked out of the sorrowful atmosphere. However, Suziu had changed a lot. In the past, when she was in school, she didn't wear any makeup, and her hairstyle looked very pure. But now, she had makeup on and her hair was permed. She didn't look as pure as before, and instead, she looked a little seductive. Anyway, it was good. As long as she could walk out of the sorrow, it wouldn't be a big deal even if she let go of her old ways. Before leaving, I secretly left 50,000 renminbi for Suziu, hoping that it could help her. Chapter 43. The next time I saw Suziu wasn't in the real world, but on TV. That year, the local TV stations started to promote one talent show after another, triggering a nationwide movement to create stars. At first, this kind of thing was very far away from me, but later on, our school was stirred up because of a talent show. One of our schoolmates had entered the final of the show and became a famous star in just a blink of an eye. That schoolmate was Suziu. When I got the news, I dropped my jaw in surprise. Suziu was beautiful, but she was just an average-looking girl. She was far from being a heavenly beauty. Moreover, I had never heard that she was good at singing or anything like that. I couldn't help but be surprised when I heard the news. Later on, I watched the recording of Suziu's performance on the talent show. I didn't know if it was because of her makeup or something else, but Susie looked much more beautiful in the TV. She exuded a special charm, and her watery eyes were very lively. No matter who saw them, they would feel that they were attracted to her. However, when I looked at Susie's face, I felt a little uneasy. Her face was rosy, but there was a mass of thick black smoke between her eyebrows. It was obvious that there was something wrong with her health. Moreover, her complexion was too good, which made her look abnormal. It was as if she was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Since I was watching through the TV screen, I wasn't sure if I had seen her correctly. However, I couldn't help but worry. I wanted to visit her, but her identity was different now. She had moved out of her house, and it was hard to find her. I had no choice but to give up. In the blink of an eye, it was the summer vacation of my junior year. At this time, I had mastered dozens of yellow talismans recorded in the death scripture. At the same time, I started to study the hand seals and the footwork. I could barely protect myself, but I didn't dare to relax. I was always on guard against Professor Deng's sudden appearance. In the past 2 years, Professor Deng suddenly disappeared. I secretly went to the university where he worked to investigate, but I didn't get any information. In addition, I also investigated the local Feng Shui Metaphysics Association. However, it's a relatively closed organization. Unless someone introduces you to it, you can't join it. After investigating for a while, I didn't make any progress, so I decided to give up. However, the longer Professor Deng didn't show up, the more I felt that he was preparing something. When he showed up in the future, he would use the cruelest means to kill me. Every time I thought about this, I would force myself to study the techniques of the geomancy masters recorded in the death scripture. However, these techniques were related to geomancy. With my current level, it was useless to just study by the dead. I had to go out and see the world. Only then would I be able to improve my geomancy knowledge. At this moment, my chi drawing technique has already reached the level of chi drawing technique like silk. Now, I can only rely on my own hard work, but I won't be able to improve any further. There was only one way for a Feng Shui master to reach the next level, and that was to find a dragon. Searching for a dragon was not searching for a true dragon like in the legends, but for a dragon's vein. This dragon vein was not the Kunlun mountain of the ancestral court of the dragon vein of the world, nor was it an ordinary hill with only a trace of dragon chi. Instead, it was the true dragon vein hidden in the mountains and rivers. Dragon seeking was definitely not what ordinary people thought it was. It was not just to provide funeral services and find rich graves for people. To a Feng Shui master, searching for a dragon was a kind of cultivation. A true dragon was hard to find. Many famous mountains and rivers didn't necessarily have a true dragon hiding there. However, in some shallow and low mountains, one might encounter a true dragon. In the study of geomancy, there was a saying, "Searching for a dragon in 10 years." This saying was enough to show the difficulty of searching for a dragon. A Feng Shui master had to spend 10 years to find a true dragon's vein. Although it was difficult, no Feng Shui master would give up on this cultivation. Not to mention 10 years, even if it was 20 or 30 years, as long as a Feng Shui master could find a true dragon's vein, he would die without regrets. Searching for a dragon wasn't just a chance for a Feng Shui master to verify his knowledge. After finding a true dragon's vein, he would receive great benefits. In terms of chi drawing technique, he could directly advance from chi drawing technique, like finger, to chi drawing technique, like pillar. Previously, from chi drawing technique, like silk, to chi drawing technique, like finger, I had studied all the yellow talismans. I had even dabbled in the hand seals and the astral steps to reach this realm. However, how much was the distance between a hair and a finger? What was the difference between a finger and a stone pillar? From chi drawing technique, like finger, to chi drawing technique, like pillar, there was no hope of reaching this realm. Only a dragon's vein had this kind of power. Some feng shui clans or sects with inheritances would have a true dragon's vein found by their ancestors for their descendants to study and use. Each true dragon's vein was a huge treasure, enough to support the rise of a feng shui clan or sect. It was their ultimate secret, and the outside world would never know about it. As for me, a feng shui master without a sect or inheritance, I could only rely on myself to walk the world. I had to use my feet to measure the land and find a true dragon's vein that belonged to me. How difficult was this path? Many geomancy books had recorded that from ancient times until now, there were only a few dozen people who had found a true dragon's vein, such as Zhang Daoling, Chen Tuan, and Three Reed's true monarch. And these dozens of people were all grandmasters who had founded their own sections. No matter how difficult it was, this was the only path in front of me. I had to walk it to know if I could reach it. Coincidentally, it was time for me to leave the university for my internship in the 4th year of university. Many of my classmates began to send their resumes everywhere, looking for companies for internships. I also packed my luggage and began to plan my travel. At this time, Chief Lu suddenly contacted me one day. He told me that he needed my help with something. He asked me to go to his company to discuss it in detail. It was like someone giving me a pillow when I was sleepy. I immediately agreed, packed my luggage, and returned home. After resting for a while, I hurried to Chief Lu's company. This was the first time I had come to Chief Lu's company. When I had met him before, I only knew that he was a wealthy businessman. However, after seeing his company with my own eyes, I finally understood what kind of wealthy businessman he was. It was a 30-story building, and it was all Chief Lu's office building. Just this building alone was a sky-high price, not to mention his other factories and hotels. Compared to his assets, the 10,000 and 100,000 renminbi that I had treated as a sky-high price the last 2 times were just a drop in the ocean, not worth mentioning. When I arrived at the place, I reported to the receptionist. Soon, a beautiful girl took me to the top floor and brought me to Chief Lu's office. After entering the door, Chief Lu warmly greeted me. However, whenever I asked him about the grave relocation, Chief Lu didn't want to talk about it. He just gave me a vague answer. After exchanging greetings, Chief Lu told me why he had called me here. According to him, this matter was related to his ancestor. I guessed he wanted to find a place, so he came to me for help. His words made me feel a little strange. Geomancy masters could find dragons, seal acupoints, or even exorcise ghosts. What kind of place was he looking for? It was more appropriate to find a geographer or something like that. Why did he call me here? It didn't seem right. However, I wasn't in a hurry to ask. After Chief Lu explained, he got up and took out a yellowed booklet from the safe behind him. Let me take a look at the content first. As soon as I saw the booklet, I felt a sense of déjà vu. However, after taking a closer look, I realized that I had never seen it before. I suppressed my curiosity and asked Chief Lu, "What's this?" Chief Lu smiled and said, "Mr. Zhou has seen this before." However, it was through the safe, so he didn't see it directly. In ancient times, a caddy was 16 taels per caddy. The woman rubbed her stomach and pleaded, "Husband, let's go buy 2. I'm hungry." Unable to resist the woman's pleading, old Lu put on his clothes and went to the street. Sure enough, he saw a blurry figure walking back and forth not far away. "Sir, give me a fire." The old man stopped and turned around to look at him. Suddenly, he disappeared into thin air as if he had never appeared. But the peddler's voice still echoed in the street. Big fire for 14 taels, small fire for 15 taels. Old Lou rubbed his eyes in disbelief, not only because the old man disappeared into thin air, but also because when the old man turned around, he saw the face of the god of fire. His legs were numb, and he stood there for a while before old Lou came to his senses. He muttered a curse and hurried back to his shop. It was strange that the old peddler shouted in the Oil Square Street for 3 nights. But no matter who came out to look for him, they could not find him. It was very strange. 3 days later, on the Mid-Autumn Festival, the festive festival made people forget the peddler's voice in the middle of the night. On this night, a gust of wind suddenly blew on the old Oil Square Street. Then a fire came out of nowhere and suddenly spread. Water is on fire. A mournful scream came from the west end of the Oil Square Street, echoing the sound of the wind and waking everyone up. The woman shook old Lou awake, put on her clothes, and hurriedly ran out. When they ran to the street, the fire was like a snake, snaking through the whole street. The crackling sound of burning could be heard. Countless people held buckets of water, kneeling on the ground with tears and snot, praying to God for rain to extinguish this damned fire. But when they looked up, there was only a jade plate like moon hanging in the sky, coldly watching the joys and sorrows of the world. Big fire for 14 taels, small fire for 15 taels. Old Lou suddenly remembered the peddler's voice that echoed in the Oil Square Street for 3 days, and the old man who looked exactly like the god of fire when he turned around. He suddenly understood something. He madly rushed into his shop on the east side of the street, took out the hook scale that had been passed down for 5 generations, ran out of the house, and knelt down in front of the fire. Grandpa, god of fire, my ancestors have always been honest people. This is the jingling 16 taels scale. He kept shouting and roaring at the top of his lungs. A miracle happened. When the fire spread to his shop, it suddenly stopped, then turned around and continued to burn to the west. Old Lou's eyes were full of tears, and he kept kowtowing on the ground. Thank you, Grandpa, god of fire. Thank you, Grandpa, god of fire. The fire burned for a whole night, and the whole Oil Square Street was reduced to ashes. Only the Lou family's shop still stood in the ashes. Although it was not as good as Shi and Enluoyang, where the world's dragon veins gathered, it was still the spirit of several generations. Even in the urban area, there were many old buildings, and the antique market was unusually prosperous. In terms of the size of the city I studied in was much bigger than Kaifeng, but the size of the antique market was 10 times bigger than that city. It was still not as big as the ancient city of Kaifeng. When I reached the antique market, I saw the wolf hair brush and the yellow talisman paper that I couldn't find the last time. I asked for their prices. They were much cheaper than the last time I bought them. However, I didn't come here to buy these things. I wanted to find a Luo Sutra. The Luo Sutra was a compass. It was the most commonly used item by geomancy masters. Whether it was to check the geomancy of a house or to find a dragon or seal an acupoint, they all needed the help of a compass. The method of determining the direction of a geomancy master was incomparably complicated. Sometimes people would be exhausted. Most of the time, they still had to rely on tools. Moreover, among the techniques of geomancy masters, although there were many kinds of magic tools, the most common and practical one was the compass. Magic tools weren't created, but nurtured. Only geomancy masters at the geomancy master realm and above could nurture their tools for dozens of years. Just the spirit of a tool couldn't be called a magic tool. One had to wait for the geomancy master to find the dragon veins and seal the acupoints to draw the energy of the dragon veins to cleanse their bodies. Only then could the tool be nurtured by them. Moreover, this was just the most common magic tool. The truly powerful ones were the ones that the geomancy master had to find the dragon veins and seal the acupoints. After that, they would be able to recognize the stars and obtain the power of the stars. There was a saying in geomancy, 10 years to find the dragon veins, and 20 years to seal the acupoints, 40 years to recognize the stars. The meaning of this saying was that a geomancy master had to study for 10 years before he could recognize the dragon veins, 20 years before he could seal the acupoints, and 40 years before he could recognize the stars. This was only for regular geomancy masters. Checking the geomancy of a house or a house would require decades of study. Only after learning all this could one embark on the path of becoming a geomancy master and truly start cultivating. After cultivating, one still had to walk the path of seeking the dragon veins and seal the acupoints. This path was not something that could be completed in decades. Just seeking the dragon veins would cause countless people to waste their entire lives. Even the people of those large sects had the influence of their ancestors and did not need to seek the dragon veins. They would have to go through the many difficulties of recognizing the dragon veins, identifying the dragon veins, and attracting the dragon veins, spending years or even decades. As for the rest, it would depend on talent and opportunity. Only after going through seeking the dragon veins, sealing the acupoints, and understanding the stars could a geomancy master take the step to transcend mortality and become a geomancy master. Since ancient times, the number of people who could become a geomancy master was few and far between. Naturally, such top-grade magical tools were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns in the world of metaphysics. That was why I came here this time with the original intention of buying an ordinary geomancy compass. If I could find an old item used by a real geomancy master, it would be considered a treasure. As for magical tools, I didn't even dare to think about them. As I walked through one shop after another, I saw many geomancy compasses. However, they were all modern metal compasses. Some were even high-tech compasses that could display latitude, longitude, altitude, and other values. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw them. Strictly speaking, when using a compass, there were many things that were related to latitude and longitude, but the old ancestor had his own set of philosophies. If these latitude and longitude values were forcibly inserted into the use of a compass, then it would be completely inappropriate. After looking through several shops, I finally found an old shop that had a large number of wooden geomancy compasses. I was happy, but when I took a closer look, I discovered that these geomancy compasses were carved. The carved geomancy compasses were rigid, and their ability to sense chi was very poor. A truly useful geomancy compass had to be a handwritten one that could sense chi. Moreover, it could be like the yellow talisman paper that could draw chi into it. This was the only way a geomancy master could nurture it and turn it into a magical tool. I was a little discouraged, but then I thought about it. In today's society, there were very few geomancy masters. Besides those who had reached the geomancy master realm, no one else knew about a handwritten geomancy compass that could be used by a geomancy master. It was too difficult to buy one. Holding on to my last bit of hope, I asked the shop owner, who was dozing off in an old-fashioned wooden armchair, "Boss, do you have those old handwritten geomancy compasses?" The owner, who had messy white hair, squinted his eyes and looked at me strangely. Then his eyelids drooped, and he muttered, "Kid, you actually know about handwritten geomancy compasses. But where can I find them now? They were all destroyed when the 4 olds were destroyed." His words reminded me of the old principal's story. In that special era, too many things happened. Chapter 46. Usually, rare treasures would appear in the brightest places, but people always had the mentality of picking up leftovers. They always thought that there would be a treasure hidden in a small shop on the street, waiting for them to find it. I was no exception. So, when I saw this small shop and thought about what the shop owner had said, I didn't feel worried. Instead, I felt happy. I strode into the shop. The shopkeeper of this shop was different from the owner, with messy hair. He wore a Chinese tunic suit, and his hair was meticulously combed. He wore a pair of old-fashioned glasses and sat on a wooden armchair. He held a pot of tea in his hand and was listening to an opera on the radio. Seeing me enter the shop, the 40-something-year-old shopkeeper stood up. It seemed he was about to come over and help me, but seeing that I looked too young, the smile on his face disappeared. He faintly asked, "Young man, what do you want to see?" I didn't talk nonsense with him. I directly said that I wanted to find a handwritten compass. "Do you have one here?" Hearing my words, the shopkeeper's face turned even paler. People who buy compasses are usually geomancers, and people's impression of geomancers is that they are old people. My image was very different from a geomancer, so it was no wonder that the shopkeeper didn't have a salty expression. "I have a handwritten compass here, but the price isn't low. Young man, are you sure you want to buy it?" I nodded. "As long as it's a handwritten compass, I will buy it, but I only want the old ones." Hearing that I wanted to buy it, the shopkeeper squeezed out a smile. "Then you came to the right place. All the things I have here are old, and I can't find new ones." As he said that, the shopkeeper took down 2 compasses from the wooden shelf behind him and placed them on the table in front of me. He then said, "There are only 2 handwriting compasses. The big one is 6,000, while the small one is 300,000. The price is non-negotiable." I hadn't seen it yet, but hearing the price made me take a deep breath. Although handwritten compasses were rare now, they weren't worth such a sky-high price. Puzzled, I lowered my head to look and couldn't lift my eyes. No wonder the shopkeeper told me to come to Mr. Zhang's shop to buy it. It turned out that there were really good things here. Of the 2 compasses on the table, the larger one was just an ordinary handwritten compass. Although it could be seen that it was quite old, it was still relatively new and made of ordinary materials. As for the small compass, it was dark yellow in color, and there were serious signs of wear and tear on its edges. Moreover, its surface gave off a feeling similar to a paste. I knew that many people who liked to play with things like red sandalwood and nanmu needed to grind them day after day to form a paste on the wood. The older it was, the thicker it would be. If their descendants wanted to use them again, they would have to dissolve the yin energy first before they could gather energy again. Gathering energy was an extremely long process. Who would be willing to waste their time to consume the yin energy? That was why these evil-holding compasses were called useless compasses. When I found out that it was a useless compass, my enthusiasm was immediately extinguished. But then I saw a slender shadow moving inside the black and gray energy. The yin energy was inanimate, so it couldn't move. If I wasn't wrong, the thing that was moving was a snake spirit. Qi was the innate qi, the essence of heaven and earth. Whether it was to humans or other creatures, it was a strong temptation. When this compass was hidden underground, there happened to be a snake spirit that had cultivated intelligence nearby. Coincidentally, it had died. Humans were creatures created by the heavens and earth. They were born with 3 souls, while other creatures lived in chaos. Very few of them could develop intelligence. Even if they did, they would suffer endless punishment from the heavens, and it was very difficult for them to live for a long time. The snake spirit had probably been punished by the heavens. Just as it was about to die, the snake spirit escaped into the compass. It relied on that sliver of qi to avoid the heavens' punishment, and formed something similar to the spirit of an arcane artifact within the compass. This situation was very rare. From a certain point of view, this compass could be considered a magical tool. However, it didn't have the function of a magical tool. Moreover, with the snake spirit residing in it, it would be more troublesome to eliminate the yin energy. However, The good thing was that once the Een energy was eliminated and the snake spirit was preserved, this compass would be no different from a real magical tool. After understanding this, I smiled at Mr. Jiang and asked, "Shopkeeper, your compass is an old item, but it has an earthy smell. I'm afraid it's something underground, right?" Mr. Jiang's face changed when he heard me. However, he quickly recovered and smiled. "It doesn't matter if it's something underground or not. If you want it, you have to pay the bill. If you don't want it, I'll put it away. We're doing business here. It's best if we don't talk about other things." If this compass was underground, it meant that Mr. Jiang's identity wasn't something that people could easily see. At this moment, I understood. No wonder the old man had recommended me to this shop. It was likely that they were in cahoots. They purposely opened this remote shop to sell things that couldn't be seen in public. I smiled and said, "Mr. Jiang, you misunderstood me. I didn't mean anything else. It's just that this compass isn't the same as other items. Mr. Jiang, you're a knowledgeable person. Don't you know that once this compass is stained with death energy, it's just a useless compass?" Mr. Jiang regained his composure at this moment. He smiled and said, "It seems I was wrong. Little brother, you're young, but your knowledge isn't ordinary. Even if we can't do business, we can still be kind. It's my fault this time. Although that compass isn't a good item, it's still worth some money. Little brother, if you like it, you can take it." I didn't expect that Mr. Jiang would be so generous. I shook my head and said, "It's hard to say if I like it or not, but I don't have any use for it. However, I do like this little compass. I want to take it away and study it. Mr. Jiang, please give me a new price." This time, shopkeeper Jiang didn't dare to give me a new price. After thinking for a while, he gave me a price of 100,000. I didn't haggle and took the compass with me. Before I left, Mr. Jiang suddenly asked for my contact number. He told me that if he found a good compass, he could contact me. I didn't mind it and gave him my number. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.